Fantastic. Do we have any new faces? I don't think so. Kevin, I remember you from a previous meeting. Everyone else here, I think I know already. All right, then moving on to outstanding project level RFCs. And share my screen, we can take a look at this. So there are two here. We've got this one around semantic versioning. Arjun.
Yeah, I can talk about it.
Yep, go ahead.
So we discussed this the last meeting, and the feedback was to add more specific details. So I added more and also like try to incorporate the suggestions that came in via comments. So please take a look. Also, it's gotten a bit long with all the details. So also happy to split it out into multiple RFCs if folks feel like that would be helpful for discussion and for record keeping.
I love the addition of all the details. I think this will help us actually act on it. I got halfway through commenting some of the details. It's all minor things like in the section about dependency versions, we talk about adding or removing and how that intersects with it being the default. I kind of wanted to separate out changing the default from adding or removing, because theoretically you could just go change the default. Sometimes you're bumping something, so you're adding something, removing something, and changing the default all at once. But I think it could help us explain what's happening to be really specific there.
So we like talking about a case where we just simply move the default without adding or removing.
Yeah, I feel like
Okay.
that's possible, right?
Yep.
And then just separating the whole default concern from add or remove would help me think about it a bit
It
more.
makes sense. They are two different. They can be treated as two different concerns, right? Yes.
I know Dan had left a practical comment in that it'd be nice if we picked the label names that the Java Buildpack is already using, just because we're already using them. Not that we can't change it, but if no one has a strong preference for one versus the other, it'd be convenient to us if we use the ones that already existed.
Yeah, sure. The only reason I did that was like some of the other repositories already use this like domain / name kind of format, but yeah, definitely.
Like, if we want to make that the convention broadly, like, we're happy to change it.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if
as well
there are some kind of GitHub conventions for labels or not, but yeah, definitely that makes sense to me. Yes.
All right. Well, if you haven't taken a look at this yet, please do. I think Arjun's looking for feedback at this point. Anything else here? All right. There's one more top level RFC, which is this one about common logging levels for Buildpacks. So this one's new this week. The idea generally is that all of the Paketo Buildpacks should support this new environment variable BP log level. To start with, we'll go with just these 3 logging levels, meaning that BP log level must be set to one of these 3 values. I think I outlined that the default value would be info. And then just roughly describing what each of the levels are for. If it's set to warn, this is like, please be quiet, basically, is what you're telling the build pack. It will only print warning and error responses from the build pack. You've got your info level. This is basically what pretty much all the build packs print by default today. That's just that level of output. And then finally, you've got your debug level, which is your incredibly verbose output that just has debugging information that's probably only helpful for build pack authors that are trying to figure out what may be going wrong with a particular build pack. So yeah, the RSC is not trying to nitpick necessarily any of the particular details of what shows up in each of the categories, just roughly outlining we should have support for this toggle, and that build pack should enable the 3 levels. And then from there, we can figure out what makes sense to appear at any of the given levels and how we can standardize logs across all the Paketo build packs. But I think this is probably a reasonable starting point. One thing that was asked, and I wanted to make sure was clear, was that the setting of the BP log level only adjusts the log output of the build pack itself, and not the log output of any of the tools the build pack might invoke. So for example, here I'm talking about us running the npm tool, maybe npm install. Setting BP log level to debug does not also mean that the npm log level is set to debug. You would have to do that independently in order to get debug output from npm.
Would it make sense to allow build packs to sort of, when that's not set at all, change defaults there? You know, obviously letting npm log level override, but you might have different assumptions about what people want.
Yeah, I think
Or
that
is it like a hard, we shouldn't do it?
I think that for any of the tools, right, that build pack should make a determination as to what is the log level for that tool that is the most useful in the kind of default position. All I'm calling out is that the setting of BP log level to any of the values should not like result in this like additional setting or modification of whatever those defaults are for these tool settings.
I guess the case I was thinking about it in is like, imagine you're trying to get the Maven build pack to be quiet, right?
Mhm.
And you set BP log level to warn. I don't know if we want to print like the standard info logs for Maven then at that point. Like folks can configure that independently, but maybe we should make assumptions based on the BP log level, like what a good default is if no one said it explicitly.
I guess I was thinking that any logs emitted from a tool wouldn't appear unless you were printing at info level or higher. And maybe that's an assumption that I need to actually call out.
That would make sense to me as well, that we would just suppress all the logs then. And then I guess we should think about how that interacts with like someone explicitly trying to get the logs, but I'm okay with just suppressing in that case.
Okay, I will add a line outlining specifically for warn that the intention here is that you're basically only going to see log output that is warnings from the build packs themselves, and that you wouldn't see like say a warning message coming from an underlying tool. You'd have to like step up to info level before you would see tool output.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
I was just going to ask if like you set this to warn and you have some other like tool specific log thing. I guess, are we saying the tool specific thing wins? Who wins in that case?
I mean, the build pack one is like the kind of like higher level debug or like log level setting in that like
so it wins.
Yeah, so like you can't see like the thing that's actually allowing you to see say Maven's output is the build pack itself. And so if you're setting the build pack's output to say suppress everything except warnings, it wouldn't make sense then that it would like emit tool output.
Okay. Yeah,
it's a little weird in the failure case.
Yeah, so some things work that way, some things work the other way. So like, I think that should be called out specifically.
Okay. I still think that like things like, you know, if a particular tool fails, that like the build pack should do a good job of like providing the entire output from the tool along with the failure message. I think a lot of the build packs already currently work this way. Yeah. But yeah, I will call all of that as a special case and like describe the intended behavior.
It can get a little bit, these are super edge cases, but it can get a little bit weird with something like Maven that prints so much output, right? To only provide it to the user if we get to the end and know that it fails means storing it all in memory, which might not be the optimal thing to do because there can be so much of it in certain cases.
You don't have to, the implementation doesn't have to be to store it in memory. You could easily write it to a file. And then like, if it errors, you just print the contents of a file.
You could, but it's slower, right? It's not like, that's not the most performant thing to do either.
Sure. What would you suggest in the case?
Like that you could, by default, if you're running in warn mode, then configure Maven to run in warn mode. I'm just thinking through the intersection here. I'm not sure I'm like coming down on that side, but I think it's a possibility that could make sense because then you're seeing warnings, right? And you said you wanted warnings.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand what you would actually see in like a given like warn output, right? Like the build pack is not going to emit anything other than warn messages. Like, how do you even orient yourself to understand what you're even looking at in terms of warning? Like, does the build pack print out other messages? Like, everything here is from the Maven build pack. And like, then only inside of that section do you see warnings? Do you print like an indication to tell you that the warnings that may appear after this line come from the Maven tool and not the build pack itself?
Yeah, I was imagining that even in warn mode, right, you might still print the titles of the build packs or things like that. And I think, you know, for a lot of build pack authors, much of the logic that they care about, like if they wanted to see warnings, would be in these tools that we orchestrate on their behalf, not necessarily things we're doing. So they might want to know just like what build packs are running, and is Maven telling me I'm using a deprecated feature that I should change? But like if we're really trying to bike shed about this, I'm not sure that realistically I foresee many people using warn mode. But I think just the high level, I am a build pack, here's Maven output, I've configured it to give you warnings, is like, would be my default way to go add a warn mode to build packs that don't have them now. That would be my default assumption about what was expected there.
And for tools that don't have any sort of warn level output, what's the expectation there?
Suppress it.
Okay. So unless they explicitly have something that is equivalent to a warn level output, you're just gonna say nothing. Even if like, I'm just imagining, so like, I don't know this for a fact, but like NPM every once in a while will emit some warning message that's like, you should be using a newer version of NPM or something. And I'm not sure that NPM itself, as far as log levels go, has a warning for this. So like, would it be surprising to a user that if they ran it in info mode, they would see a warning message, but then when they run it in warn, they see nothing? And that behavior is different necessarily than like, say, if I ran something that used the Maven build pack.
I guess it's not ideal because you don't have the option you want, which would be to configure warn level logging, if in fact you can't configure that. But I'm not sure that it's a deal breaker because I feel like most people are working in one ecosystem or the other a lot of the time and sort of want the things they expect. So Java users are heavily embedded in the ecosystems of their build tools, and the tools have already put thought into like, you know, if I'm running at this log level, what do you want to see in a success? Like, oh, if it failed, I'm going to go around and I'm going to print a bunch more information because I think you actually want that, even though you wanted me to be quiet until it failed.
I think basically like where it sounds like I should go is that as far as the Buildpacks own log output goes, it should really only print warning messages when in warn level. But for the output of tools, it is left up to the Buildpack authors to determine what is sufficient warn level output. And that like this RFC doesn't really have anything to say on that front other than to say Buildpacks will make a determination.
I think that's a good way to give flexibility. And then if we find it's a problem, we can fine tune it.
Great. Sounds good.
The only last nitpick I would have there is like, do we still want to print the build pack titles? I feel like that's a thing you might want to warn on which build packs.
Yeah. I think the Buildpacks need their warn output should be able to indicate like where specifically some warning is coming from to make that clear. Okay. Well, yeah, if you have further thoughts, feel free to comment on the RFC.
Just like a quick to confirm, like each log level there would be like a superset of the one above, right? Like with the debug, I would get everything that I would get from warn and info. That's guaranteed, right?
Yeah. So that they operate in kind of the idea. There's a post here about like log levels and how they operate and a standardized set of them.
Yeah,
But
I'm
yeah,
thinking like maybe it
they-
would be nice, like just call that out there in the RFC.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So any further comments on this, please feel free to post on the RFC itself. I think that was it for project level RFCs. I looked earlier, but I don't think there were. Yeah, there's this one WIP RFC, which I don't think we're going to end up talking about. Which leads us to the only thing on here, which was a discussion of Paketo documentation. This was a reprisal of the original discussion that I think happened more at the previous working group meeting. Frankie does not appear to be in the meeting. I'm not entirely sure what was meant by this topic. Does anyone else here maybe know what Frankie wanted out of this?
It was just pain points around our documentation in general, like she called out there, since we're doing some design stuff and other things.
All right.
So maybe still just looking for feedback, I assume is probably what.
Yep. There's already what seems like a reasonably lively discussion on this. If you have thoughts, please feel free to check it out and leave your own comments. I think that's emeritus status. This one was added. Does anyone know what's going on here?
Yeah, I put this one. So I just wanted to call out that I guess it was the first time it was used, I think, with Josh, is that correct? So it seems like a system that worked fairly well. And then Mark requested himself as well to be emeritized. And is that like the voting process in that is like pretty formalized, but is the requesting process or like was that ever formalized for like how long someone is, non-active or anything like that around the process for people auto enrolling in that emeritus action?
I guess you're talking about a case like Josh's, where Josh
Yeah.
was like kind of left the project and hasn't really stated anything and is somewhat unreachable in some cases.
Yeah.
I think that the original RFC just kind of left it to maintainers to make a determination as to whether or not the individual was like a active contributor. I think that like the voting process should give that person ample time to like contest the vote. but I think it should be like in most cases like relatively obvious that the person is no longer active. I think like so we currently have like an ongoing vote for Dan Thornton to be moved into emeritus status across a number of the teams, and like Dan has he's most of his focus is today on the CNB part of the upstream and the spec and tooling and stuff, and yeah, I don't imagine he's going to be like contesting the emeritus status. I think it's a pretty like clean cut case, but I do want folks to be able to like provide the feedback. The like process is intentionally designed to be like a private internal one. So you'll notice that like all of the votes are like set up as like private things that like only folks who are currently members of the teams can actually like see and converse about. So we should feel like it's okay to have like an open discussion about the individual status.
I did notice that as well. I thought that was a good idea, but thank you for providing that context.
Yeah. In the case of, for example, like Mark requested to be, retired and placed in emeritus status. And I think he just reached out to me directly. So I ended up just like opening issues to say, or opening kind of like comments on the different teams saying like, this is what's happening, just to keep everyone up to date. But I feel like individuals should feel free to say, I'm not actively involved in, say, PHP. Maybe I just want to like become an emeritus member for PHP, but I'm still active in some other number set of teams. So I think that, ongoing, it's like really up to just notify the maintainers of individual teams as to like what you want as far as your overall status goes.
Cool. Sounds good.
Okay. I see Frankie may have joined. Frankie, we did bring up a minute ago this Paketo documentation discussion. We didn't know what maybe wanted to be discussed other than it's here. Please take a look and like add more feedback. Is there anything more you wanted to say on that?
Ideally, I was hoping to have like a more in-depth conversation in the working group meeting once there's like more happening on the discussion thread, but I think given the state of the thread, people can probably keep asynchronously generating for now.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the agenda then, folks. Is there anything last minute that folks wanted to discuss in this meeting before we adjourn? All right. Well then, I guess I'll see all of you next week. See ya.